Suresh sir, shall we start?
Hello, Anoop.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, ready.
Okay. Suresh sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sir, shall we start, sir?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. It's audible.
Okay. Yeah.
Archana.
Okay, sir. Good afternoon to all dignitaries, guests, and delegates. With great joy and immense exultation, I feel privileged to extend a warm welcome to all present here on the second day of first edition of Online National Lecture Series 2020, conducted by the Department of Economics, Thoma College, Tiruvalla. I'm extremely honored to welcome the resource person of today, Dr. Suresh Babu M., Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Science, Indian Institute of Technology, Chennai, dealing with the topic Decoding Economic Growth in India, Responses and Prospects. I welcome you, sir. Proceeding to the programs, I call upon Mr. Arvind Shankar N. for the welcome address, Assistant Professor and Program Coordinator, Postgraduate and Research Department of Economics, Thoma College, Tiruvalla. Sir, you may kindly take your time. Arvind, sir, you can...
Archana, is it my turn?
Yes, sir, your turn.
Yeah, I was not able to hear. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Respected Principal Dr. Varghese Matthew, Honorable Chief Guest of the Day, Dr. Suresh Babu M., respected Moderator of the session, Dr. Abraham George, and all the participants of the program from various walks of life. A very good afternoon to all. Today, we are proceeding to the second day of the first edition of Online National Lecture Series organized by the Department of Economics, Thoma College, Tiruvalla. The three-day webinar is on the broad theme impact of COVID-19 pandemic on macroeconomic variables. Had a great beginning yesterday with the inaugural lecture Ramachandran, Vice Chairman of Kerala State Planning Board. He had delivered an on the Kerala initiative during the COVID-19 pandemic. Here, on the second day, we are shifting to a national perspective of the impact of the pandemic. In this occasion, we are honored with the presence of an eminent academic, one of the premier institutions in India. Let me formally acknowledge the duty bestowed upon me. The chief resource person of the talk is Dr. Suresh Babu M, Assistant Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. He is an expert in the field of applied macroeconomics, trade and development, and industrial economics. He did his MPhil and University, New Delhi. Dr. Suresh Babu had worked at reputed institutions like Gokhale Institute, Pune, Economic Change, and Indian Management, Kozhikode. He was also a member of the Asian Development Bank, World Bank, WTO, Center for Development Studies, and so on. With all respect, the name of the college and economics, I wholeheartedly welcome Dr. Suresh Babu M to this online lecture series. Sir, you are welcome.
Thank you.
The moderator of today's session is Dr. Abraham George, Director of Research, Institute of Sustainable Development and Governance, Trivandrum. Popularly known as Tony Sir, Dr. Abraham George was a former principal of the college and had been the head of the Department of Economics for several years. He was also the guide for several PhD researchers. We are really fortunate that such an exceptional academician is the moderator of today's lecture. In the name of the college and the department, I welcome Dr. Abraham George to this program. Sir, you are welcome.
Thank you, Arvind.
Due to the constraint of time and network, let me conclude my words by welcoming all the participants of this program, including various academicians, teachers from various colleges, retired teachers, doctoral and postdoctoral fellows, students, and others. Welcome you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your welcome address. Moving on, with great pleasure, I invite the moderator of the event, Dr. Abraham George, Director, Research Institute for Sustainable Development and Governance, Trivandrum, and former principal of Thoma College, Tiruvalla. Sir, you may kindly take your time.
Hello, Anup.
Yes, sir. Audible, sir.
Still that banner is there in front of me.
Okay. So, Dr. Now, sir?
Can you see me?
Yes, sir. You are visible. Yes, sir. We can see you.
Okay. I'm sorry. I am unable to see my picture. Now I can see only Dr. Suresh Babu. Oh, excellent. Good evening, all.
Good evening, sir.
Respected Principal, Chief Guest Dr. Suresh Babu, faculty members, beloved students, and all other participants. I'm extremely glad to attend the second lecture of this online national lecture series organized by the Department of Economics. I would like to thank all of you, especially Head of the Department, Professor Reggie Matthew, and the conveners, Professor Anup Koshi George and Professor Arvind Shankar, for inviting me to this program. Let me congratulate our department for initiating this online venture. My fond regards to Dr. ICK John also, who has just retired from principalship and also from our department. I also take this opportunity to wish all the best for Dr. Verghese Matthew, the new principal, and also Professor Reggie Matthew, the new head of the Department of Economics. And it is indeed a privilege for me to join this online lecture along with the well-known economist Dr. M. Suresh Babu, serving at IIT Chennai. I too join each one of you in extending a very warm welcome to Dr. Suresh Babu. The organizers have chosen a very important topic for today's meeting: decoding economic growth in India, responses and prospects. Today's topic: decoding economic growth in India, responses and prospects. As the moderator, I will introduce the topic briefly by explaining the background of India's economic growth story. As students of economics, we all know that during the early decades since independence, our economy recorded a very slow rate of economic growth. But the Indian economy could start registering robust GDP growth rates in early 1990s after the liberalization and opening up of the economy. Since the Indian economy has been maintaining, since then, the Indian economy has been maintaining reasonably good economic growth rates under various governments. During the first decade of the present century, India had been receiving a lot of praise as well as attention for its decent economic growth rates. There was even a tendency to bracket India with the leading Asian economic power, China, regarding the GDP growth rates. During the Great Recession, which started around 2008, when almost every country world over was facing severe economic slowdown, both India and China could sustain their commendable GDP growth rates. However, during recent times, the scenario started changing for the worse for the Indian economy, which started to slow down. That slowdown of the economy was further aggravated by the spreading of the COVID-19 epidemic. Here, the interesting fact is that India's GDP growth rate was already fallen to low levels even before the coming of the COVID-19 pandemic. Many economists believe that the policy disaster like demonetization, which was later on followed by very hasty and unplanned implementation of GST, which together had huge adverse impact on almost all sectors of the economy. No wonder, even before the COVID-19 epidemic, renowned economist Dr. Raghuram Rajan had commented that Indian economy was already in a structural crisis. Thus, the crisis was already there. Such a difficult situation became all the more worse with the coming of the COVID-19 pandemic. The sudden declaration of a prolonged lockdown with barely 4-hour notice led to millions of helpless migrant laborers walking back to their distant native villages, as there was little provision even for food or any basic items, essentials for keeping them in the cities where they had been working, or many of them were actually staying there in the cities with their families. In his talk here yesterday, Dr. V.K. Ramachandran had described the plight of these migrant laborers as heartbreaking. Nowadays, not only the Indian government, but also governments world over are unnecessarily obsessed with the GDP growth figures. Without doubt, achieving high GDP growth rates is important. But the greatest concern of a government, especially a democratic government, should be the welfare of the common man. The impact of the present pattern of growth and the present economic slowdown on the poor and the marginalized of our population is a real concern. Growing poverty and unemployment and the widening of economic inequality should receive much greater attention than the GDP growth rate figures. That is what I feel. India's future growth depends on the effective policy responses of the government to meet the emerging challenges. In today's newspapers, you might have noted, it was reported that the Nobel laureate Abhijit Banerjee saying that India was among the worst performing economies in the world. According to him, this is today's news. According to him, the government's economic stimulus package was too inadequate to tackle the present crisis. He also said that the central government could have done more to increase the consumption spending of the low-income population of our country. So no quick fixes and like short-term stimulus packages, which the government has already declared, will resolve this problem. Effective policy responses from the part of the government are necessary. Now, let us listen to what an expert in the field, Dr. M. Suresh Babu, has to tell us about the issues and challenges in the economic growth story of our country, and also about the required policy responses from the part of the government to take our country for a more sustainable and inclusive growth path in the future. So thank you very much. And with this brief introduction, let me invite Dr. Suresh Babu for his presentation, Decoding Economic Growth in India, Responses and Prospects. Let me also tell the participants that after the presentation by our chief guest, there will be an open discussion. There you can raise your questions and Dr. Suresh Babu will answer you. So thank you very much, Dr. Suresh Babu.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, and indeed a pleasure and a privilege to talk about a very important issue. And let me start by thanking the organizers for giving me this opportunity to talk today. Principal, head of the department, and the team in the Department of Economics, Thoma College. I really thank you all for this opportunity. You see, when there are veteran teachers who are moderators of sessions, then there is a small advantage and a disadvantage. Because a lot of issues have been very clearly spelled out by the moderator in the opening remarks. So I would try and use that as an advantage and start off from there. Okay. Now I have a small request. Please mute your mics if you're audible, if your audio is not very clear or something, so that there could be no echoes and all. I have a small PPT presentation, so I would start with that. Yeah, give me a minute. I will load this. Okay, I hope it's clear. Yeah. So the title of my talk today is Decoding India's Economic Growth, responses and prospects. Yeah? I wouldn't focus much on responses because it's out in the public domain. And our moderator has already hinted at the salient features of the responses that have come out. But I would like to focus more on the prospects. And that's a worry for me. Yeah? And that I think is something on which all of us should discuss. So I will be biased towards the later part of the title. Okay. Let me start with this slightly hazy slide, but this is a very common slide that has been out in public domain now. That is, this is the growth rate of Indian economy in the last quarter. Well, there's no big surprise. The economy shrank close to 23% in the last quarter, right? And this shrinking of the economy has now created a kind of situation where policymakers are finding themselves in a spot. Ways through which they could come out of this spot are very limited. And to exercise certain options, you need tremendous amount of political willpower. Okay. I'll come to that towards the end. But I want to highlight two things in this growth picture, which was there in public domain, and all of you have seen this. Agriculture has grown in the last quarter, phenomenal. And we don't really find that a big surprise, right? Because a lot of these workers, which, Dr. Abraham George was mentioning of this reverse migration that was happening, finally landed up in agriculture fields back in their villages, and that has contributed to availability of labor at a time when agriculture operations were actually starting to begin. Okay. But for me, worry is 5 and 6 in this. That is construction, trade, hotels, and transport. A very simple reason that the magnitude of contraction of the economy in these two sectors are 50% or close to 50%. Imagine construction sector in the country is shrinking by 50%. Trade, hotels, transport shrinking by 47%. And that's a worry. I would also like to draw your attention on item number 8, that is public administration, defense, and other services, where there has been a shrinking of 10%. Okay. Now, why should this worry us? Well, barring agriculture, where the gross value added from agriculture grew, all the other sectors in the economy shrank. Right? Minus 50, minus 47, minus 39 manufacturing, minus 23 mining. And these four, to me, are the most important sectors in the economy in terms of job creation and employment. Construction, large number of migrant workers rely on construction sector. Services, we know that there is a dualism that is persistent in the economy. A dualism where we have the coexistence of modern services with traditional services. Yeah, modern services such as IT and banking and all, coexisting with very low-end urban jobs, again in the service sector. But then, on the whole, when we look at services, it is also a major job creating sector where value added has shrunk by 47%. Manufacturing is a problem of a different kind because manufacturing was never a major employment generator in the economy. Then there are some signs of inflation lurking slowly I'm a bit worried because this could be a supply side inflation. It is unlikely that it's a demand pull inflation. So there are supply bottlenecks coming out of manufacturing sector. This inflationary process could actually lead us to a very, very difficult situation. Okay. So the point that I want to emphasize here is that, well, the gross value added of the economy shrank. But most important thing for us is all those sectors that are generating employment are the ones that have shrank maximum. So what is the implication of this? Very straightforward. There are two implications. When these sectors are contracting so sharply, it would either lead to more and more people losing jobs, decline in employment, or more and more people failing to get one job, that is a rise in unemployment. And a combination of these. We would end up in a situation where people who have jobs losing jobs, people who want to get into the labor market and find out jobs are not able to get jobs. So the net effect of this on the economy is going to be very, very severe. We'll come back to that towards the end. Okay. This quantum of decline seems to have surprised many, but I would say it should not have. Because the kind of lockdown and restrictions we had, no? Well, we have this, abrupt announcements, which by now we are used to. With such kind of abrupt announcements on the economy, well, there's no other result that one can expect. So, the lockdown curtailed nearly 2/3 of the GDP. And this proportion of 2/3 came down in subsequent phases. Till the end of May, there were different kinds of lockdowns of different severity. After that, there was some slight relaxations in certain parts, but on the whole, I would say 1/5 of the GDP are and were restricted and are restricted even now. Even in August, we find that close to 10% of GDP is restricted. So, the economic trajectory going forward will be affected by two things: A, wealth losses, and B, income losses of this last 5 months. So, this decline in June quarter can be, I would say, entirely attributed to activity restrictions. Our moderator pointed out to this fact that there has been or kind of a signal of growth slowdown for some time. I'll show you the numbers in a minute. These activity restrictions, in a sense, intensified a process of slowdown. So, where are we now? There is no official measure, or inaccurate it may be, on the scale of losses. How much have we really lost out? This shrinking is, I would say, kind of a ballpark figure that we have arrived. Actual magnitudes might be even worse. Then, first priority, given this circumstance, is to devise responses to revive growth in the economy. We have to really think of reviving growth, and that is where perhaps we are again and again ending up in a situation of clueless macroeconomic policies. What do I mean when I say that we still don't have accurate figures? We all know that 40% of our GDP comes from informal sector. And there's no data on it. Even on an annual basis, we don't have data. So the GDP data in India are always prone to large revisions. Students of economics would always know that there will be an advanced estimate, weak estimate, revision 1, revision 2, and finally we get some, final revised estimates kind of a thing. We know that from each stage, when we move to revisions, there are stages. So basically, it's an estimate than a measurement until the second revised estimates is published, which is actually 2 years later. So the actual magnitude of this contraction, I would say, be clear only after some time. So we have to take this with a pinch of salt. Okay. Then quarterly GDP calculations, the quarterly contraction that has come out now, must rely even less on hard data. Because projecting formal economic growth rates on the informal economy of several activities would give us different set of estimates. And it is possible that growth rates may have been overstated. When I talk of growth rates, this magnitude of contraction here, this 23% itself, is a kind of not a very true estimate, as anecdotal evidences suggest that in many sectors, formal firms actually gain some share, but a lot of firms have really lost out. It is very hard to quantify this. So the point that I want to emphasize is that it's minus 23%. After revisions, when it comes out, we'll get a slightly clearer picture. But what it gives us at the moment is, from this quarter, when we move on to this financial year, you might find the story slightly dismal. Okay. The effects of this weak economy in the last 5 months will now start showing up. One, very straightforward. A lot of businesses have shuttered. I've been part of a committee headed by former Reserve Bank Governor Dr. C. Rangarajan to advise Government of Tamil Nadu in terms of devising a strategy to come out of this COVID crisis. And we have been talking to a lot of business people the last few months. And we find that number of businesses have really wound up, especially in the MSME and the tiny sector, which means production as well as employment is down now. Second, this unpleasant side of a crisis that has come up, that is, it's a sharp increase in economic uncertainty. And this uncertainty has started to increase since March. And this economic uncertainty has changed the savings and investment behavior for many people, many agents in this economy. Typically, we find that consumption is getting postponed. Investments are very sluggish. Entrepreneurs are really rethinking whether they should go ahead with investment proposals, for a simple reason that let's wait and see. That is a kind of an approach. So we find that certain firms have already exited and certain new investments are unlikely to come near a point. And that is the uncertainty issue that I've been talking about. Okay. Now, I want to highlight one aspect when we talk about this economic uncertainty. Well, we know that economic systems are often affected by different kinds of crises. East Asian crisis, currency crises in various parts, foreign exchange crises, the financial sector crises, all of that. There is something that is unique about this COVID-19 crisis. Here is a crisis that has come to the economy which has arisen not out of economic factors, but non-economic factors. Why is it significant? It is significant because we have very less control over these non-economic factors. For example, if there is a currency crisis, we can work around exchange rates. If there is a financial sector crisis, we can work around the financial system or sector. Here, the problem is that the present crisis is the outcome of something that is happening elsewhere, not within the economy, which means that our policies then have to be in tune with number of parameters to bring it back to normal. So, the economy is far from normal, and I would say that it might stay there for a while. There is one issue that I want to highlight here. We find that there is a sharp decline in public administration, close to 10% decline. Public administration, defense, and other services. That's a big surprise. We were really surprised to see that, because our conventional Keynesian policies suggest that public spending is the only growth engine that will fire at this moment. But we find that public administration itself has contracted, which means that there is absolutely no fiscal stimulus in the economy. Or rather, whatever fiscal stimulus that the government is putting out into the economy is quite feeble. Yeah. So, this gross value added in public administration, defense, and other services are quite contradictory to the aims of the government in terms of their expenditure and policies for combating the crisis. That's a worry, actually. Okay. Let me put it in a comparative perspective. And this is another very, very interesting kind of a graph that was doing a lot of rounds in social media. What it has earned India is that until recently, as Dr. Abraham was mentioning, India had a tag of one of the fastest growing economies of the world, or one of the fastest growing emerging economies of the world. What COVID-19 has done for us is that we have got the stamp of the largest shrinking economy of the world. I want to draw your attention onto China here. Remember, with all our controversies and our focus on China, China is still growing at 3.2%. One can have a lot of debate about their official statistics and the quality of statistics or whatever it is. But at the moment, the numbers look really good for China. Japan, Canada, Italy, France, UK. UK was hit very badly, but India now ups in terms of contraction, not in terms of growth. We need to keep this in mind, because two things. One, remember, in a globalized world, our revival is also dependent upon the revival in other economies. We don't see much of a possibility from this figure there. Okay. Second, it's a very interesting kind of a message from Babu, who was former chief economic advisor as well as the chief economist of the World Bank. Babu compares economic growth and COVID-19 deaths in Asia and Australia, or Australasia put together. China is always not bad, doing well. Look at Vietnam. Look at Sri Lanka. Shrinking is not that bad, but look at the COVID-19 deaths per million population. Sri Lanka has done remarkably well. And of course, we don't need to highlight Singapore and Malaysia and all, because Singapore, of course, the size advantage as well as the technological enhancements in various sectors have really helped them. Malaysia, of course, can be compared. Remarkably, Thailand has done very well in terms of per million population, and yes, fared very badly. So all that I am trying to do is to put these numbers which we have in the Indian context in a comparative perspective, so that we know where we are standing. Okay, let me move now. Well, already the point has been raised that India's GDP story has been a fascinating story after 1991. Remember, it touched double-digit growth rate in 1 year, 10.3%, and that kicked off a lot of comparisons between India and China, whether India could overtake China, etc., etc. But on an average, if you look at growth rate after economic liberalization of 1991, 7%. It's the average rate of growth. Some years quite bad and some years quite good. But now where are we heading? McKinsey's projections show that we might head to -7%. Yeah. I'm just putting it out for one small point. That is, remember this 7% growth rate, -7% contraction, is a huge slide down. And the magnitude of this contraction is enormous. Yeah. Simple arithmetic tells us that we are moving from +7 to -7. And that's a long way off. Yeah. Okay. So if we really look at this graph, I would say that from 2017 onwards, we find that the economy is showing a downward trend. Already know some of the reasons for that. Some of this kind of policies that were thrust upon the economy could not really gulp it down. It choked the economy. Net result is that growth rate also got choked. The slide started from then on, and now we are heading towards -7%. Okay. Look at any key indicator of the last quarter. And when we compare it with the 2019-20 quarter, we find that it is enormous decline. And this is Ministry of Statistics data. It's not any kind of data that has been spreading around. Coal production, cement, steel. For the first time, total telephone subscribers have come down. That's shocking, because India is one of the largest growing telephone market in the world. Commercial vehicles, we know for some time it has been trouble. Ports and airports were shut down, so passengers are not moving. So it's not very surprising. Magnitude of contraction or percentage change that has come about in last quarter is really going to have a lasting impact on the economy. Given this issue, what is the issue? I have highlighted 3 points. One, peculiar nature of this contraction in terms of employment providing sectors contracting fast. Two, in a comparative global perspective, our contraction has been of a very high magnitude. And 3, we find that even before the COVID-19 crisis came, the economy had started to slow down. Yep. last 3 years. Given these three things, or keeping these three things in mind, what has been the policy responses? I'm not going to detail the responses of this policy because a lot of public discussions have already taken place on this. But I would like to draw 3 points. One, I would say that government has mostly relied on RBI to support the economy. And this is, I've been writing on this in the business line, yeah, that government has not used fiscal policy to stimulate the economy, but it has relied on monetary policy. And in one of my articles, I argue that what it has led to is a situation where RBI is actually losing steam, because monetary policy has certain limits, and we are almost reaching the limits of this monetary policy. Yeah. I wonder what Milton Friedman would respond to if he has seen this kind of squeezing of monetary policy. Yeah. So government has mostly relied on RBI. There is a need to absorb at least some of the losses of smaller and informal firms and low income households. That has not come on at all. Yeah. Whatever meager fiscal incentives as well as so-called cash distribution. Imagine 500 rupees to the Jan Dhan account, yeah, and 500 rupees in a month kind of a thing. You can easily calculate what will be the daily amount that a person would have if the person does not have any job. Imagine a situation where it's a family of 3 or 4, so per capita availability of resources just shrinks. Yeah. Okay. So the point that I wanted to emphasize is that there is a need to absorb at least some of these losses of smaller and informal firms and low income households. That was evidently absent in the policy response. Now, given this weak financial penetration in India, these monetary steps are likely to have limited impact on especially this kind of entities. Why? Because we know that monetary transmission mechanism in India gets weakened. And we also know that there is a lot of informal financial activities that take place. Yeah. So, given these 2 questions emerge. One, is it time now for a big bang fiscal push? Yeah. That has been a debate. How we should actually have that big bang fiscal push? Do we have resources? One set of question. Second question, given that the government does not have enough fiscal space, yeah, for such a push, can we create some kind of a fiscal space to have this big bang fiscal push? Yeah. Now, these 2 questions are very important for us because the future policy direction will have to reckon with these 2 questions. Okay. Let's quickly go over these 2. Now, what is the challenge that the government is facing now? The challenge appears to be less of a lack of fiscal space, and more than that is a central government's worry that undirected large schemes create economic distortions and corruption. Yeah. If the government could actually think or conceive something like an MNREG at that point in time, after the global financial crisis, yeah, and go ahead with that, well, I think we can create fiscal space. There are many areas that require investments, and a lot of them are state subjects. So what is happening now in the economy is that there appears to be a lack of trust between the center and the states, and we have been seeing it out in the open especially when it comes to GST compensations to be given to the states. Yeah. So this lack of trust between center and states on the leakages, as well as how unconditional allocation has to be made to states, all of that is actually creating a kind of a limbo in the economy. And the net effect is that there is no policy action. And I would say this is resolvable. Why? Because we already have successful schemes where the center provides funds and also sometimes execute works. And in some areas where the center provides funds and the state execute works, yeah, rural roads, rural housing, sanitation, and all of these things are very relevant now. The problem with the states is that states don't have enough fiscal resources. Yeah, they are in a fiscal stress now, but they have administrative control. So you have to really have a coordinated effort between the center and the states in terms of designing as well as executing this fiscal push that the government has to give now. Why do I say this? I say this because all the engines of growth have faltered now. Yeah. Consumer expenditure is down 27%. Investment is down by 47%. Government expenditure is up only by 16%. Demand from exports, yeah, that is basically exports minus imports is very high. That is precisely because imports are very less. Yeah. So whatever little we are exporting, it becomes a surplus. Our trade balance is comfortable, right? But these two, minus 27 and minus 47, in terms of individual consumers expenditure and investment by private businesses, has to be compensated somewhere. And the 16% change in government expenditure is not enough to do the trick. Okay. So the virus outbreak hit Indian economy just as it started to witness a growth slowdown. COVID has really accentuated this situation. Emerging market economies have experiencing deeper and deeper recessions now. And recessions in emerging economies are likely to last longer. So the prospects of other emerging markets and which are lagging in terms of growth would actually create a kind of instability in the global economy, and the recovery in emerging markets would be a prolonged process which could actually impact India also to some extent. So the pace of recovery in India ultimately would depend upon the policy support. I would highlight just two more points and maybe wind up. What is the shape of things to come? And this is something which is very, very debated now. There have been a lot of debates among economists on the shape of global growth. Some people said it is U, some people said it is V, some people said W, but now it's more or less clear that we might have a K-shaped recovery. And I want to elaborate on that. Remember, IMF had already warned about this because from the past experiences with pandemics, yeah, as early as 11th May, IMF had cautioned that major epidemics in this century have raised income inequality, and that is precisely the K shape. Yeah, the two forks of K are pointing to the widening of inequality. So rising income inequality is a key characteristic of this K-shaped recovery. And that is exactly what India is facing. So this is the new letter to describe future growth. Not we, not you. Yeah, some government economists recently forecasted there will be a U-shaped recovery or a V-shaped recovery. No, it is going to be K-shaped. Why? Because this last two lines diverging from a perpendicular K shape is this new evidence that is coming from across the world. And I'll show you two evidences from outside and from India. One, if you look at global evidence among countries, we find that China has been an incredible buying spree since 2008. It has been buying all the strategic companies, crucial ports, yeah, liberally financing governments, and amassing a lot of capital. Within country, we find that investors in Indian stock market are pretty okay. They had a slump, but we find that markets have almost bounced back, 37, 38 Sensex. Yeah. So this is happening at a time when millions have lost their jobs and private consumption has almost collapsed. So the inequalities in the system are going to widen. Interesting kind of experiences come when we look at some companies which are servicing distance working. Yeah. The new unicorns. Yeah. I should not name, but you know, the Baijus and the kind of unicorns that are really getting capital flows. They're amassing. Yeah. But we also find that there is a tendency for the big to eat the small. Geo swallows most of the future group now. The big bazaar is gone. Yeah. Next in line, I am sure, is DMart. So DMart is now forced to adopt price discounting and aggressive strategies. Adani has acquired a lot of airports. Yeah. He has a quasi monopoly on ports. So the point that I want to emphasize is that the trend towards widening inequalities are very clear, whether it is globally or whether it is within country. This phenomenon to me goes beyond Schumpeter's notion of a creative destruction, because concentration of profits in the hands of some sector leaders has reached unprecedented levels now. And in India, we don't find policy responses for that. This forces actually a kind of, you know, problem which is a larger social problem also. In a general social welfare model, governments would actually take up the care of these losers from the crisis. Yeah? But increasingly, we find that governments don't have the capacity or the competence to deal with that. So what is the way out? And that's the new global trend now. The way out is a kind of an encouragement of escapism through what I would call as the economics of nationalism. Yeah, a lot of protectionist trade policies have emerged now. And this package is accompanied by an erosion of institutional mechanisms. Yeah, and the state generally gets, you know, captured by powerful businessmen, which again leads to widening of inequalities. Okay, so let me come to my last point. Do we have the resources, enough of fiscal resources to have this big fiscal push? And that's where the problem is. No, we don't have. Because the activity levels in the economy are low, tax revenues will decline. And one of the most recent studies by Eli Patnaik and Sengupta shows that the decline will be around 12.5%. GST revenues are declining. Budget estimates of tax revenue for 2021, that is 16.3 lakh crores. Already a very ambitious target. I don't know how they arrived at that. Yeah. Was with this assumption that the nominal GDP would grow at 10%. And please remember, we won't be anywhere near the 10% growth. So this tax revenue will not grow. And I'll show you one calculation, yeah, which shows that this GDP growth rate, which is actually less compared to what was projected in the budget, would lead to a decline in the own tax revenues. Because there are 5 types of taxes that come to central government's gross tax revenue, GTR. Yeah. taxes from corporate profits and income tax, 28% and 26% of gross tax revenue. Indirect taxes like GST, yeah, customs from non-oil imports and union excise duties from oil imports. Again, another 28, 6 and 12%. That's the government's gross tax revenues breakup, right? And we know that all these components would actually decline now. Yeah. But let us make a heroic assumption. Let us make a heroic assumption that the nominal GDP is not getting into a negative zone, but it is getting into zero growth. Yeah, I'm using the word heroic assumption. It is very unlikely. Given such a heroic assumption, we would find that, I'll come to the data straight. Yeah, we would find that the growth rate in corporation tax would be negative 17.6. Income tax would decline by -7. GST -4 at least. Customs duty is massive fall. Excise duty is massive fall. And gross tax revenue would fall. Please remember, I'm being very optimistic in putting this because I'm working with a model where I'm assuming that the nominal GDP growth is 0, but most likely I'm sure it is going to be in the negative zone. So if it moves to the negative zone, all these calculations will go even into a very, very difficult region. So there is a clamor for fiscal push. Yes. Do we have the resources? And that's where the government has to think out of the box. Yeah. Well, internal resources. RBI has enough liquidity. You can issue bonds, raise the resources, but you have to be wary of inflation. And that's the point that I raised in the beginning. You need to have great amount of political courage and will for that. Second, external resources. We are getting a lot of dollars now because globally interest rates are down and India seems to be still an attractive proposition for global investors. And what I'm talking is largely portfolio investments. So we can actually tap into it and create assets with this global flows that are happening. And this could be a distant possibility. Why I'm talking about distant possibility? Because McKinsey had projected that compared to financial year 20, if we start working now, by financial year 30, we can have some corrections. And such corrections need major steps from the government in terms of increasing tax buoyancy, reviving growth, yeah, and getting economy back on rails. So let me conclude. Where are we? We need to have a big fiscal push to get out of this mess. And government needs to think of more innovative ways of financing the deficit. That has been the discussions now for some time. And we have been writing about this. Why are we worried about this stance? We are worried about this stance for a simple reason that financing the budgeted expenditure of the government, that is 30 lakh crores, which was budgeted, which was estimated in the Union Budget 2021, as well as whatever little or incremental COVID-19 fiscal package is a challenge, is a big challenge. It becomes an additional challenge with lower tax collections. Yeah. So we are going to miss all this mark. Where will we end up? It has been obvious for some time that India will emerge from COVID-19 recession, I would say, with 5 things. 1, record fiscal deficit. 2, a record public debt. 3, a fresh lease of life for the twin balance sheet crisis confronting banks and companies. That is, companies having red balance sheets and they're passing it over to the banks. A set of complex monetary challenges and of course reduced growth potential. To avoid all these things, perhaps it is time that we really think about demand revival strategies for which we have been waiting now. I would stop here now. I would be happy to have questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Suresh Babu, for your excellent presentation. It is very informative and enlightening. And I'm very happy that students will be really enriched by this presentation, because these facts and figures one may not get from elsewhere other than an expert in the field. And so you were telling us that India has now become one of the largest shrinking economy, and that contraction has mostly found in the all important, most employment generating sectors. That is the sad thing about the present slowdown. And at the same time, you said many countries, even small neighboring countries, neighboring economies, they are neighboring economies, and also in the East Asia, they are doing much better than our country, and we are made to believe that our country is in competition with China and almost at par, and we are doing exceedingly well. So that kind of a propaganda government has to stop, and government has to recognize the present situation where we are in. You also mentioned that our revival will depend upon the revival of all these countries. But if our employment generating most the important sectors which contribute to national income, if they are not coming up, then actually there is no use. And with regard to policy responses also, you said government so far has been relying mostly on monetary policies, which are found to become more and more ineffective, and their scope is very, very limited. Instead, you are advocating that fiscal policies should be more used, and we need a big bang fiscal push. But unfortunately, the too much concentration of power and also resources are taking place towards the center. And as you rightly suggested, only through mutual trust and accommodation, only through that, the fiscal policies can be effectively implemented, and through the various state governments, then only the economy will start picking up. And another point you suggested, you cautioned against, was the widening economic inequalities. And the revival is not going to be V-shaped, it's going to be K-shaped. And at the same time, government policies giving undue incentives to big industries and corporations, and it has led to further concentration of wealth, growth of concentration of wealth in the hands of a limited number of big industrialists. So government has to work definitely on, effectively on implementing policies through introducing efficient fiscal policies, and for that, government, as you suggested, government should have the political will and courage to embark upon deficit financing and more progressive tax reforms, and also to attract foreign investment. Because these are the only ways in which we can increase aggregate demand in the economy and put our economy back on rails. So it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And now the floor is open for questions. I am not sure how many questions you may be able to ask. I know Bob. Professor Aravind, you may please think about that. You just tell the participants about the time and the number of questions they can ask. Professor Suresh Babu will be answering you.
So we can have
Sure,
4 to 5
sure.
questions. We have 10 minutes time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Problem.
So participants can ask questions. I would like students, girls too, girl students, or
Sir,
they should
I
raise.
have a question. Sir, how can we protect all the micro businesses during this time of pandemic?
If I understand, the question is on protecting the micro enterprises. Yeah.
Yes, sir. How can we protect or preserve all the micro business enterprises during this time of pandemic?
See, there are two problems that have come up in terms of the micro enterprises. One, there's a collapse of demand. So whatever these enterprises are producing has to be demanded. So the first kind of a medicine that the economy requires now is revival in demand. In fact, in one of the articles in Hindu Business Line, I had written some time back that the economy actually needs a growth vaccine now. Once when you have a revival in demand, then slowly these enterprises will start getting back to their normal production lines. Now, it is here that the second part of this package is very important. Unfortunately, the second part of the package came first. It is providing credit to enterprises have already come. But who will take this credit if aggregate demand in the economy itself is very low? If you look at the numbers in terms of people availing these credit facilities, you find that still we have not reached the target. The simple reason that I am not sure whether I'll be able to sell my product even if I take credit and sell it. There will not be buyers. So why should I take credit? So I would say the first point that we need to have is a demand revival, aggregate demand revival strategy. Second is, of course, I think we need to start thinking about micro enterprises from a long-term point of view. Yeah? And when I talk of a long-term point of view, we need to think about innovative ways of aggregating them, innovative ways of providing some kind of area-based or industry-based insurance schemes where enterprises should actually be contributing, because whenever there is an economic downturn, the first set of people who are hit are these micro enterprises. So capital providing is important, yes, that alone is not enough. So coming back to your question, I would say the way to protect enterprises is in terms of generating demand for their products.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Participants, you can take your time. If you have any doubts, we can clarify.
So can you explain the K-shaped curve once more?
Shape is, just look at a K. So there is a fall. There is this perpendicular line, and then there is a rise for some people, and then there is a downward decline for some others. That is when you write K, no? So the two forks of the K point to widening of inequality. For some people, there will be growth, yes, and that's what we see exactly in India. For some others, they lose jobs, their incomes are gone, which means that the divide between those people who benefits from recovery and those people who have been left out from the recovery, the divide is going to be more. And that's the whole idea of this K-shape.
So we have another question by Shaji K. John.
Yeah.
Fiscal policy, unless accompanied by monetary policy, irrelevant. Is it true now?
I would be happy to say the question the other way around. Monetary policy without fiscal policy would become difficult now, because we have seen a lot of monetary policy, not fiscal policy. But I completely agree with you. You see, in a very complex economy like India, when I say complex, what I mean is kind of transactions and the kind of activities that we have, a lot informal, yeah, we find that we need to have a very judicious mix or a blend of fiscal and monetary policies. We can't rely on one. Yeah? We need to have both. Yes. So in that sense, yes, I completely agree with you. We need to have a combination of both. But what we have been seeing is we've been just waiting for a fiscal measure to arrive onto the economy.
Sir, in the last part of your lecture, you mentioned about coming out of this recession or growing or moving forward with a high physical deficit. So, to what extent it can go, or what would be the target? Like, will it be possible for the country to go ahead with fixing the target?
Difficult, Anup, because see, the problem of fiscal deficits, we know that you are actually going to put the burden of repaying these deficits onto the next generation, no? Especially when you are borrowing and then financing this deficit. But then, what is a sustainable deficit is a different question. See, this is an exceptional year. And some of the calculations already show that the combined center and states deficit is going to be close to 14%. Imagine. Already it has reached something like 8%. By the time the center's deficit has already crossed 100% of the targeted figure in the budget. So by the time we reach March 31st, we're going to really overshoot all the targets. Okay. Now, what can we do? So that is where I want to really, think of some very innovative ways of financing this deficit. One, you can have some bonds, COVID bonds or something, to mop up this liquidity in the market now. Market has a lot of liquidity now. All these report deposits of the banks which are getting to the Reserve Bank of India, we can tap into that a little. Some bit of deficit can be financed through that. That need not be inflationary. Second, there have been some calculations which actually show that to impose 4% wealth tax on people. Yeah, I'm again repeating, 4% only on the wealthiest people of India. That will give us 1% of India's GDP. So that's where we need to think out of the box in terms of financing the deficits. Yeah. So we should not be unduly worried about growth and deficit. And yes, we should be very worried about a huge deficit. I think subsequent years, we should have a plan to combat this deficit and bring it down. And that's where we need bold and courageous steps.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, this is Aravind. I have a question. I have just a doubt. can we expect something like such a fiscal stimulus package from such a government who is increasingly privatizing our economy? I mean, today in a newspaper, I read that the electricity distribution is going to be privatized soon in the states. So, from such a government, such a central government who is taking advantage of their political vote bank politics, so can we expect something such a fiscal stimulus from that government to save this country within at least next 10 years? I'm really doubtful about that.
I think it's a question of political economy there, no?
Yes, sir.
So, there's an old saying that modern macroeconomics was nothing but the political economy of 19th century. What used to be called as political economy in 19th century is modern macroeconomics. Right? So, I think we can think very innovatively in terms of fiscal measures. For example, what we have advocated in Tamil Nadu is an urban employment guarantee scheme. Exactly like a rural employment guarantee scheme, COVID has hit the small towns and urban centers quite a bit. We need to have an urban employment guarantee scheme. I don't know whether the government will take it up and do it, but so what I'm telling is that we can think of some innovative schemes. And that could be the fiscal stimulus, and that could be the demand generating stimulus. We don't need to have always a conventional Keynesian path. We can look at a broad Keynesian way in terms of a fiscal policy. That I think is possible. That should be there.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, sir. I have a question that the government prior to the COVID situation have its impact when our growth rate was coming down, because you mentioned that our growth rate is coming came on the -7th. So I have that whether the privatization policy taken by the government have a role to play in it.
I'm sorry, Mr. Arun, the question was not clear to me, but from what I understand, will the privatization policy have any impact in terms of this growth rate or not? Yeah? Am I anywhere near that question?
Yes, there is. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So,
yes.
No, I think we have to see privatization from a slightly different perspective now. No? All privatization is not good. All public sector is also not good, no? And that is what East Asia has taught us. If you look at the development experience of East Asia has been able to enhance the rate of growth with what we call as strategic interventions. Certain sectors, the state should be there. Primary education, government should be there to provide primary education to everyone. There's no need of government in terms of providing, sorry if I'm using an obnoxious term, no need of government to provide beer parlors to people, no? So I think we need to think where the government should be. And there should be a strategic exit of the government from certain sectors. That should give the government enough money to focus on very important core sectors. See, one of the weaknesses that has come out of the COVID crisis is the fragile nature of our health system. No, we were running helter-skelter to increase the hospital facilities. So, some privatization in some areas, in some sectors, if it can generate enough resources, and if we can use that resources for so-called well-being or development of people, there's nothing wrong in that. And that could be growth generating in the long run as well. That would be my view on that.
Participants, I hope the questions are over. Now we would move to the vote of thanks. Now I welcome Dr. Vinay Govind, Assistant Professor, to propose vote of thanks. Sir, you may take your time.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Good evening to all. Honorable Chief Guest Dr. Suresh Babu sir, moderator of this session, respected Dr. Abraham Joe sir, respected Principal Dr. Vagis Mathu sir, former Principal of the college, respected Dr. I.C.K. John sir, our HOD, Professor Reggie Matthew sir, and other dignitaries and academicians who are attending this lecture. Now duty is urgent than that of returning thanks. I deem it a great honor to propose the vote of thanks to all who have helped us in making this lecture such a resounding success. First of all, I would like to propose a hearty vote of thanks to our Chief Guest Dr. Suresh Babu sir, Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Science, IIT Chennai, for gracing today's lecture. Thank you very much, sir, for your interesting and thought-provoking address. Thank you, sir. This session would have been incomplete without Dr. Abraham George sir, Director for Research, Institute of Sustainable Development and Commerce, Governance, Trivandrum, who moderated this session. Being a renowned academician, he very well managed the lecture and the discussion part. On behalf of the department and college, I sincerely thank Dr. Abraham George sir. I would like to express our profound gratitude to our principal, Dr. Varghese Mathu sir, for his support and presence in this session. I would also thank our beloved HOD, Professor Reggie Mathu sir, for his moral support and guidance for this endeavor. Thank you, sir. I am very grateful to Dr. I.C.K. John sir for his valuable support and guidance and encouragement throughout the journey of our department and college. Thank you, sir. I wish to express my sincere gratitude to Dr. M.P. Philip, former HOD, SB College, Changanasheri, Dr. Anila Sakaria, Assistant Professor, SB College, Changanasheri, Johnson K. Joy sir, HOD, SB College, Changanasheri, and Shaju sir, HOD, Department of Economics, St. Thomas College, Koranjeri, for their valuable presence and support. I also wish to express my deep sense of gratitude to the former teachers of our department, faculties from other departments and colleges, research scholars, and all other dignitaries and academicians who are attending this lecture. I would like also to thank Professor Anup Koshi George and Professor Arvind Shankar for making this lecture a grand success. Thank you, sir. Finally, the wonderful students who have turned up in much a great number, not only from our department, but also from other departments and also from other colleges. Thank you so much for your cooperation. Once again, I thank all of you for your cordial support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your word of appreciation. An important announcement as we end today's session. Tomorrow we have the resource person, Dr. Martin Remingam, Assistant Professor, CSSCD, Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore. The topic will be dealt on migration and labor market crisis in India. We have the moderator, Dr. V. Prakash, Principal, University Institute of Technology, Kaingaram. The session will be held at 3:30 p.m. I thank all the participants for your beloved time here spending, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for your participation in this session. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Hi, Suresh Babu.
Thank you, Suresh sir.
Yes.
Philip Changanasheri.
What a surprise, Philip.
Yeah. It was
Good to hear from you.
yeah. It was a wonderful talk. It's excellent.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We'll be touch our mail. Huh?
Okay. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.